All right, Adam, we should be live.
All right, I want to thank everybody. My name is Adam Zimkowski. I'm a community organizer with Councilmember Kshama Sawant. I want to thank you all for joining us. This is the community prep meeting. In about 28 minutes, we're going to be as many as possible, hopefully people signing up for public comment to testify to the city council later on today. The council meeting is at 2 p.m. We want as many people as possible to call into the city council to say that they should pass right to council legislation put forward by Councilmember Kshama Sawant, together with hundreds of community members, renters, dozens of organizations who think that renters facing eviction, all of them deserve the right to an attorney. And we want this legislation passed in its current form, its strongest possible form, without any means testing at all, with no loopholes, no watering down. We want city council to stand with renters and working people, especially marginalized communities, communities of color, women who are disproportionately impacted by evictions during this vote today, which is going to take place at 2 p.m. Before we go into a lot of the information about why this legislation is so important and how we can fight for and win the strongest possible legislation, I'm going to kick it over to Nick Jones, who's a community organizer in our office, who's going to really quickly run through how we're going to all sign up for public comment at the end of this meeting at noon. So go ahead, Nick, take it from here. Hopefully most of you have already done this before, but if there are new people, we like people to be prepared so we can sign up as quickly as possible right at noon when comment opens up. So Nick, go ahead and show us how to do that.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, hopefully folks have joined us before, have done this a couple times at this point, but hopefully there are also new folks who have not had that opportunity yet to make public comment, to really tell the city council, why we need really strong, legislation that protects working class people and protects renters. So what you're going to do is you're going to need to find this page. Should be pretty straightforward. What I usually do, whatever browser you're using, generally you can just type in Seattle public comment in the browser bar or the search bar. And it should be the very first link. This publiccomment.gov link should be the first one pretty much every time. Just click that and it should bring you right to the page 2 hours before the city council meeting, which will be, 12 p.m. today. You're going to see a form go live here. And so right at about 12, we're going to all have this page ready and pulled up to make sure that as soon as we can, we all sign up to give public comment to make sure that our movement is really bringing our voice into City Hall and, telling City Council what we need as working class people and as renters, which is right to council with no means testing or loopholes. So as we go through the community prep meeting today, definitely leave this page pulled up. So later, as clock strikes 12, we can all fill it out together. That's about it. And I will kick it now back over to Adam.
All right, thank you so much, Nick, for running through that with us. Oftentimes, we are able to be joined by Councilmember Sawant for these community meetings. It looks like she will hopefully be able to join us for a few minutes, in about 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes there's other meetings or prep needed for the meeting itself, but it does look like she will be able to join us shortly. To provide some of that political context that's so important as community and activists are, set to give public comment to the city council in just a couple of hours. But let's go ahead, while we're waiting for Kshama to be able to join us, we really do want to kind of arm our movement with the strongest possible points for why we need right to council legislation so urgently. We needed it 2 weeks ago when it was set to be voted on in its final form. Unfortunately, Democrats on the council chose to postpone it by 2 weeks. It's critical to remember that even in that period of 2 weeks, we have seen people getting evicted in spite of the eviction moratorium. There are loopholes, in that. And so at a rate of 1 per day, we're seeing renters being evicted. So it's not just a victimless delay that's occurred, but even more insidious was the clear intent on the part of some of the council members to insert loopholes, and in particular, a means testing. And what does means testing mean? It means that renters are going to have to prove potentially, if some city council members get their way, renters will have to prove their need in order to access the right to an attorney. We think that that is not something that would benefit the legislation or renters at all. In fact, it would benefit landlords. And statistically, what we've seen every time with means testing, whether it's for things like welfare or especially when it comes to renters facing eviction, is that it just adds unnecessary hurdles and hoops that people in crisis, low-income people, especially marginalized community, have to jump through in order to receive this basic thing, which in this case is an attorney when people are facing losing their homes. And we know that landlords have attorneys 90% of the time, renters only 10% of the time. And that's obviously not a fair situation. So we want through this legislation to correct that. I want to go ahead and ask, Nick and Sasha in our office. We've been making a lot of phone calls over the last weeks and months, talking to literally hundreds of people about the need for this legislation. I'll just start with Sasha. Sasha, what are some of the reasons that you've heard from people or that you yourself, are kind of driven by when we talk about why this legislation is so important for the city council members to pass and in its strongest possible form? Sasha, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adam. Yeah, this legislation, the right to legal representation during evictions, is crucial for keeping tenants housed. We've seen that almost 90% of evictions in Seattle have led directly to homelessness, which is, of course, an incredibly difficult situation to find yourself in, but even more so now with COVID, putting people at increased risk at catching COVID. And this has been incredibly effective. It's been passed in other cities. Landlords are less likely to file eviction proceedings when they know that their tenants will be represented. You've got these corporate landlords who are just file evictions over, really minuscule issues. We saw someone here in Seattle who her landlord was trying to evict her over just being $2 late, $2 short on rent. This could keep hundreds and hundreds of people in their homes.
Thanks, Sasha, for that. And Nick, did you have anything you'd like to add to this question of, why is it so urgent? And actually, I just noticed that Councilmember Sawant is able to join us, and I'm not sure for how long. So before we go to Nick, talking about why it's so important that we pass the strongest possible right to counsel legislation, no means testing or loopholes, let's go to Councilmember Sawant, who can provide some of that political context that we benefit so much from as we're preparing in just 20 minutes to sign up for this public comment, then at 2 p.m. to pressure the council to pass this right to counsel legislation. So Shama, go ahead and take it from here, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. And I have no doubt Nick will go over some of the crucial points that we know from overwhelming evidence why means testing is a bad idea. But just to add to what's coming up in Nick's points, I just wanted to say from today's briefing, just to report from this morning's briefing, that it's very clear that there is an amendment to introduce means testing, and unfortunately and shamefully, most of the Democrats are going to be voting yes. It remains to be seen if all the Democrats vote yes for the means testing. And we need to clarify in public comment that this is a bad idea, because we have a city council that is dominated by self-described progressive Democrats, and yet they are doing something that overwhelming evidence shows does not have a good impact on ordinary people, on the most vulnerable people, and in fact has a detrimental impact on them. And the only people who are helped by this kind of means testing loopholes are the people who already dominate in the economy, big business, big corporations, in this case, corporate landlords, big banks that underwrite most of the real estate deals. And so we have to be very clear, there's nothing benign about any means testing program. And we have to also clarify that even when the means testing program is not onerous, and this is an argument that they're going to use today, Council President Gonzalez has put forward an amendment that says that the right to counsel, the right to a lawyer, if you're facing eviction, is restricted to those who are quote unquote indigent, meaning poor. And the Democrats are going to claim that this is okay because it is not an onerous thing. It is it's not very invasive. It's not asking you to bring your paychecks and proof of income, and it's not asking you to notarize on an affidavit. And all of that is true, but we have to clarify that even if, and I'll come to, and we also have to clarify why this is the least invasive thing and why they haven't brought in worse means testing amendments. There's an explanation, political explanation for that as well. But as far as this amendment is concerned, we oppose even this amendment, even though it is less invasive than worse and more insidious means testing programs, because it is, well, first of all, it is going to force people to sign something or say that they are poor. That is humiliating for people. We have seen time and time again, even when we have this, what seemingly simple kind of test, it is actually a barrier, and people don't seek the service because people just want the service. They don't want to be characterized as poor or needing help. And this is completely to the credit of ordinary people because they are dignified and they are self-respecting. And we have to support the dignity of all people regardless of their income status. And that is why we oppose even the least invasive means testing ideas. Furthermore, and this is the bottom line, means testing of any kind, even a mild version of it, sets the wrong precedent. Democrats today on the city council, self-described progressive Democrats, have the chance to do the right thing. They have the chance to set a right precedent, a correct precedent, away from means testing and towards universal program. And there is a reason why we are so staunchly advocating for a universal right to counsel rather than a means tested one, is because over 4.5 decades, we have seen that means testing is used by pro-big business politicians, both Democratic and Republican, to divide and rule. First of all, bottom line, means testing is supported by politicians who oppose the program in the first place. But when movements are strong enough to force their hand, and today our movement is strong enough to win right to counsel, they will try to insert insidious loopholes. It's just like the $15 minimum wage. When we took office, not one council member in addition to me was willing to support 15. At the end of the day, we had a unanimous vote less than 6 months later. But while voting yes on 15, they extracted ruthless loophole after ruthless loophole to undermine the legislation. This is what means testing does. When they can't actually oppose the program itself, then they will insert weaknesses. But the problem, especially with this, is that when a program is not universal and it is available only to people who are willing to say they're poor, for example, is that it is a divide and conquer strategy. One reason why Bill Clinton and the new Democrats, the neoliberal Democrats, were able to destroy welfare in 1996, because when those programs were put in place in the 20s and 30s and 40s, in the first place, they were set up with means testing. And because of that, there was decade after decade of attack on those programs, saying there were false rumors, people are abusing it. It's people who deadbeats who are using this, who don't want to work. None of this had any basis in reality. But because those programs were not set up as universal programs, it allowed the corporate media machine and the big business politicians to demonize these programs. And it was all of that that then ultimately allowed Bill Clinton and the Democrats to completely destroy welfare. In contrast, Social Security has endured for almost a century, for 86 years, precisely because it is a universal program. It is available to everyone. It is very, very hard for Democrats and Republicans to divide white versus black, South versus North, to divide working people, because everybody gets Social Security. Everybody wants Social Security, and it makes it very hard to dismantle it. And that's why, despite repeated brazen attempts by both Republicans and Democrats for decades, Social Security remains intact. Today, self-prescribed Democrats in Seattle in the 21st century have the opportunity to do the correct thing for history. And yet, once again, astoundingly, they are going to pass means testing. So we should reject even this least invasive idea and oppose this means testing from Council President Gonzalez. And this is the last point I wanted to make. And the fact that it is not a worse kind of means testing that has come forward. I mean, let's be clear. It's not 2:00 yet. So maybe there are worse amendments coming. Nothing can be ruled out. We have seen this happen all the time. They surprise us with things because they don't want our movement to be empowered. But assuming that this is the amendment and there are no worse amendments, there is a reason why worse amendments didn't come forward, because ordinary people, socialists, renters' rights activists, renters' rights attorneys, we have all stood together, unified, and made it very clear we oppose means testing. That has put an intense spotlight on the Democrats. They know they are exposed, and so they are not daring to do something worse. So even if it is, even the fact that they have a less onerous means testing amendment that they've put forward, that is credit to the movement, not credit. They are not doing that because they are being benign. They're doing that because they know that they probably can't get away with something worse. So let's be clear about how movements are so effective, and let's make sure we win the right to counsel today. And then let's go forward in making sure that school children are not evicted during their school year, which is a bill that we are bringing forward from my office. We're also going to prevent default evictions, meaning even if you don't get to court, the lawyer can defend you from from being evicted. So we are going to bring forward many renters' rights, building on the victory that we want to win today.
All right. Well, thank you, Councilmember Sawant. Thank you, Shama, for adding that political context. And I think that actually ending on that note of just the strength of the movement and how we have been able to really push back on this, what does appear like council members' intent, and hopefully they don't follow through, but to add means testing, as a precedent setting in a bad direction, to really see how many in the community are demanding the other side, demanding the strongest possible right to counsel. And I wanted to ask Nick Jones if you could talk a little bit about who is in this movement that's demanding right to counsel, that's demanding, an eviction moratorium extension, that's really fighting for renters' rights and putting pressure on the council. If you could talk about that for a bit. And then, of course, we'll come back to this question of how to most effectively pressure the city council. And we're just about 10 minutes out from public commenting opening up, so we'll be conscious of the time as well. But Nick, talk about this movement and who it is for a little bit, if you could.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, our renters' rights movement, not just on this, but on extending the eviction moratorium and fighting for rent control. We've been building this for a long time, constantly fighting on this. And even the eviction moratorium extension, there was a community letter signed by over 47 organizations, I believe, renters' rights organizations like the Tenants Union, the TRU, B Seattle, just a ton, Faith Action Network, a ton of community organizations as well. I don't have them all off the top of my head, but I think that shows the strength of the real grassroots support for these kind of demands, these urgent reforms that renters really need. This not only withstand this pandemic, but the economic recession that we're also going through. And a lot of the same people that are fighting for the eviction moratorium are fighting for right to counsel. There's a community sign-on letter as well for a right to counsel legislation that is growing, I believe, by the day. Last time I looked, it was like many of the same people that had signed the eviction moratorium community letter had signed on to that one. These are organizations that represent, dozens to hundreds of people. Tenants Union of Washington is quite a large organization. We also got progressive fighting unions like the UAW that are involved in this, UAW 4121, I believe others. And not only that, but like the people that really make up this movement, as Shama was talking about, are just not only activists and socialists, but just everyday people. There's people gathering signatures on a community petition over like the last weeks. Just got hundreds of signatures. I know in my experience, it's hard to go out and get hundreds of signatures, to kind of the drop of a hat. It takes a lot of time and effort, but we've seen a pretty substantial community response to, going out and talking to people. And I actually did a little bit of signature gathering this weekend. And pretty much everyone I talked to, once they had heard about this legislation, signed on, understood the need to stop the possible tsunami of evictions that could happen if the eviction moratorium runs out. That even beyond that, renters absolutely deserve the right to counsel. We know in Seattle, 90% of evictions result in homelessness. And if renters don't have any kind of financial support or any kind of right to counsel, only 8% of renters that get served eviction notice in that instance end up losing their housing. Whereas, what is it? 85% of renters end up keeping their housing if they have financial support and a right to counsel. So often it's just about people not being able to pay the rent, which is even more dire when, there's been millions of people losing their jobs during this eviction or economic crisis and pandemic. I think that just underscores just how transformative this would be for so many people, and ensuring that people get that really scary eviction notice, oftentimes, as Sasha was saying, for complete arbitrary or really small things, instead of just, possibly being on the street or having their lives completely devastated, that they have some support and are able to keep staying on their feet, which is something I think absolutely is worth fighting for.
Thank you, Nick, for just, going through it pretty methodically, just all the different organizations and community groups and unions that have come out in support of this right to counsel legislation. We had a press conference this morning with, Edmund Winter, who's the managing director of the Housing Justice Project, with Violet Lavatai from the Tenants Union of Washington State, Jacob Shear from Real Change, Anastasia from UAW, or a rank and file UAW member, and really just underscoring the broad support for this right to counsel legislation. We also, Shama was able to read a letter from the ACLU, which they just recently last week sent to the city council, which, one portion says, quote, "Many tenants without counsel are bewildered and intimidated by the system, and many lack the ability to participate due to employment, childcare, or transportation reasons. Consequently, tenants default at high rates. Landlords count on this imbalance and can file meritless eviction cases with impunity. Beyond the imbalance of representation, evictions proceed quickly compared to other civil litigation. Any defenses that are available to a tenant are virtually impossible to prove without a lawyer." It goes on to state, "Creating loopholes to or gaps in the right to counsel significantly undermines its efficacy." So basically, just as Shama was noting, there is plenty of data out there from other cities that have passed right to counsel, and also from decades and decades of mean testing on other programs, that it does not achieve any goal or end of making legislation stronger or more efficient. That's especially the case with right to counsel. What it mainly does is limit access for people who would be eligible, especially when it comes to right to counsel, especially when it comes to people facing eviction. At one of the previous press conferences, we had a tenant union organizer, Julissa, talking about people who don't speak English as a first language, how high a barrier it is to preventing evictions, and how transformative right to counsel would be at that. There's a number of other reasons, of course, why we need this legislation. We've talked over and over again, in email blasts and hearing testimony from dozens and dozens of people over the last weeks about how it's the corporate landlords like Goodman Real Estate with $2.5 billion of assets. That's the main evictor in the city of Seattle. It's big businesses, banks that are really benefiting from this Wild West style of housing crisis, with eviction, gentrification playing a huge, detrimental, destructive role in our community. So having a city council that's willing to pass the strongest possible right to counsel legislation is important. And if, as Shama indicates, it appears likely, there is going to be a means testing added. And even if that means testing isn't super high at this point as a barrier, we need as a movement to reject that, to argue that any means testing it sets a bad precedent, first of all, and it will actually exclude people even having a low bar for being eligible for right to counsel or other basic services that renters, working people deserve. We're just a few minutes out. We're about 4 minutes out. So I think that, let's go ahead and we'll have Nick, keep his eye on the public comment, and pretty soon we'll go to Nick and just kind of show people where they should be with their tab to be refreshing, to sign up as early as possible. We know that frequently landlords themselves, the lobby, they pay people to be signing up for public comment. So we want to get on as early as possible and in as big a numbers as possible. In the meantime, why don't we go to Nick, and as we're refreshing, we can hear about some of the most effective ways to pressure city council members to pass the strongest right to counsel legislation with no means testing, no loopholes. Just here's some kind of, tricks of the trade, so to speak, in order to most effectively make that comment. So Nick, if you could talk us through that while at the same time kind of getting us prepared and ready to sign up in just a few minutes here.
Yes, happy to. Hopefully everyone has this tab still pulled up from earlier. I've just been clicking refresh, waiting for the form to go live. And once it does, we can fill it out together and make sure that we're all able to get on public comment to, give the kind of testimony we've been talking about today. And for public comment, just some tips to help make it as efficacious as possible, as Adam was pointing to. Folks should expect to have only about 1 minute to speak, which is not a lot of time. If anyone tried to speak and some made these kind of important points in less than 1 minute, but it's very difficult. So I would say, start with just introducing yourself. If you're part of an organization, like a union, a community organization, like a part of a faith organization, anything, that speaks to the community that is wider, organized in a wider basis, that can create a lot of pressure. Definitely bring that in. And then, really drive in with maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3, if you're really, really confident, but probably 1 to 2, solid points about kind of the things we've been talking about here, why we need to oppose means testing, what right to counsel would mean for renters facing eviction, why it's so urgent that we need to pass this, all the things council members want that myself, Sasha, and Adam have all said. Or if you have your own story about how facing an eviction was incredibly difficult, or someone that did. I saw in the YouTube chat, Scott was mentioning how Epic Management, a corporate landlord, brought unlawful detainer evictions against him twice. And though he was able to beat those in court, I guess, facing those was just a nightmare for a renter with no support. And that's absolutely something, like, those kind of stories have real impact. Definitely bring that in and really hammer home why we must oppose means testing, as Adam was saying. Any means testing, right, is really cemented in a real Reaganomics kind of approach of like this pretty racist idea of welfare queens and people that are like profiting off the system unjustly. And that's like the basis of where these ideas of means testing come from, something we absolutely should oppose. Working class people deserve universal programs that make sure they're protected. Like that shouldn't be a lot to ask in an incredibly wealthy society that, working people make run. We should be able to benefit actually from the results of all of our labor, which means like having basic protections and not fearing that your shelter is going to be ripped away from you in a global pandemic. These are all, basic points we can draw out. I'm refreshing. It's 12 o'clock now, so hopefully it should go live any second. Folks should be really prepared and just be hitting refresh with me. One of the last things I'll say, all this scaremongering about people abusing the system too. What I've heard from Edmund Witter from the Housing Justice Project, and what we said, the vast amount of renter evictions come from non-payment of rent or people unable to pay rent. Sasha was mentioning that one renter who got it's live. All right, I'll stop talking. It's time for us to fill this out together. Hopefully everyone is already ready. Make sure you fill everything with a red star. You know it's important. You have to fill it out. Put in your full name. It's very important to put in your email address. They will send the link to get on the Zoom call where you can give public comment to that email address. So make sure it's accurate and accessible. For your phone number, the last 5 digits. What is it? 600. Put in, whatever is the phone that's accessible and usable for you. That's how you'll be identified in the stack to get called during public comment. So make sure that that is recognizable to yourself. Just click this. And I like to add, whatever I'm planning on speaking about, like even if you don't end up getting called, sometimes it's nice for them just to see what you plan to speak about anyway. That adds a little bit of extra pressure. Go ahead and hit submit, and you should get an email to that whatever email you put in with the link, and you should be able to sign up and help bring our movement's voice into the halls of power. Looking forward to hearing everyone's testimony. Thank you all again for joining us today. And yeah, let's pass right to council with no means testing. I'll pass it back now to Adam.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick. And yeah, I don't have much to add. If you are having trouble though signing up, please just keep clicking it. Oftentimes the link gets broken, but if you just keep trying. And similarly, if you try to call in after signing up and the city council or for whatever reason you have difficulties, just keep on trying. Eventually they'll get to you. Really looking forward to hearing the testimony, to passing the strongest possible right to counsel legislation. On behalf of Councilmember Shama Sawan, myself, Nick, Sasha, those of us in our office, thanks again for joining, and really looking forward to hearing the testimony and of course, fighting for so much more beyond, whether it's to strengthening just cause eviction law or protection law or other really vital renter rights. Really excited to fight in the future. So solidarity, and thank you for joining.